The glass panes were rattled as if they were determined to shatter as the wind howled through the cracks in the door, conveying a biting chill. Laura's gaze was fixed on the gloomy expanse of the lake outside as she sat motionless in her worn armchair. The empty villa was briefly illuminated by a few flashes of lightning that streaked across the horizon, allowing her to tighten her grasp on her chest. She observed a figure standing under the porch roof, still, shadowy, and absolutely mysterious in that fleeting light. "Elliot?" She called out softly, her voice scarcely rising above the storm. However, there was no response, only the unrelenting gusts of wind that appeared to ridicule her vulnerability. She stood, attempting to stabilize her quivering legs as she advanced toward the door. Her heart thudded violently in her chest, propelled by an unnamed sensation that swirled within her as much as by terror. A gust of icy air, transporting fine droplets of rain, rushed in as she opened the door. Elliot stood there, his sweater saturated, his hair affixed to his forehead, and his eyes, those unwavering, penetrating eyes, held a mystery she could not bear to confront. He said, "You should not be here alone," his voice low and nearly absorbed by the wind. "It is not secure for you." A lump formed in Laura's esophagus, causing her to freeze. She repeated, "It is not safe," and she attempted to conceal the chaos within by emitting a hollow laugh. "Elliot, I am more secure than you may believe. I arrived in this location to conceal myself, rather than to confront any challenges." His broad shoulders appeared to obscure the world behind him as Elliot advanced. "Are you concealing yourself? Would you say that this could continue indefinitely? Your emotions." "Our emotions." "Laura, it does not simply vanish." She was taken aback by the force of his words, which struck her like a blow. His visage was once again illuminated by a flash of lightning. His deep blue eyes were ablaze with determination and a subdued anguish that compelled her to turn her gaze away. She desired to withdraw, to close the door and prevent all interaction with the outside world. However, her body rebelled. She remained firmly planted, as if the tempest was eroding every ounce of her sanity. She murmured, "Elliot, you are not aware of the content of your statement," as if to persuade both of them. "I certainly do." He drew nearer, his gaze fixed on hers. "Laura, I have been remiss in my timing. I am anticipating your recognition of me as an individual, rather than solely as his son." The sharp bang reverberated throughout the room as a strong gust of wind rammed the door behind her into the wall. Elliot's focus remained unwavering, despite Laura's flinch. She immediately recognized that something had changed between them, not only tonight but also in the past. At this point, there was no longer any place to conceal oneself. The cyclone had arrived and was engulfing them. "Elliot, please enter." She broke the weighty silence by stating, "You will contract a cold." But as he crossed the threshold, she was aware that she had entered a place she should never have entered by opening that door. Laura was unable to muffle the secrets of memories as the rain continued to patter against the windows. She was seated at the kitchen table, her hands securely encircling a mug of tea that had been left to cool for an extended period. A soft shadow was cast across her face by the dim glow of the overhead light, emphasizing the weariness that had been profoundly etched by time and seclusion. The slight groan of the wooden door behind her caused a chill to run down her spine. She was taken aback when she turned to see Elliot entering the room, his tresses still damp from the rain. "Are you experiencing insomnia as well?" she inquired, her voice attempting to maintain a sense of tranquility but occasionally faltering. Elliot's irises were veiled by contemplation as he shrugged. "It is difficult to fall asleep in the presence of such heavy rain. How about you? Another night of insomnia?" Laura hesitated before responding, allowing the silence to linger between them. "I believe there are nights when the rain is not the source of your insomnia." Her words glided through the air, suspended in the delicate space between them, yet they were both light and weighty. Elliot did not respond immediately. Rather, he retrieved a chair and perched across from her, his gaze lingering on her face as if he were attempting to uncover the secrets she was attempting to conceal. "Is this your consistent demeanor?" he abruptly inquired. his voice low but tinged with a subtle challenge. Never expressing your true emotions, keeping everything inside? The inquiry struck her as an unexpected setback. Her eyes dilated as if he had touched a raw nerve that she had worked so hard to conceal. She responded, "I am unaware of the subject matter," but the minor tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Elliot's gaze was as deep and tranquil as the lake outside, as he gently said, "I believe you do. You appear to be in good health. You maintain the illusion that everything is in order. However, I am skeptical. It is impossible for an individual to remain content while experiencing such isolation." The fragile facade Laura had spent years constructing was shattered by his words. She struggled to maintain her composure as she inhaled rapidly. "Elliot, there are certain matters that are best left unsaid. Understanding certain concepts is unnecessary." Elliot leaned forward and placed his palms together on the table. His voice became more mellow, but its intention became more acute. "However, how can you continue to exist if you do not express them? How can you maintain the integrity of everything within?" Laura was compelled to revisit a flood of memories that she was unwilling to confront as a result of his words. She was once a woman who was overflowing with ambition. She was brimming with stories and aspirations that she wished to impart to the world. However, Ethan, the man to whom she had pledged her affections, had insisted on the contrary. With his icy gaze, he had dismissed everything that made her feel alive, stating that writing is merely a foolish distraction. Laura had concealed her ambitions, burying them in the recesses of her mind, and became the ideal wife in his eyes. However, despite her efforts to preserve the marriage, Ethan had departed, leaving her with nothing but the ruins of the existence she had once believed to be hers. Elliot's gaze was unwavering and constant, drawing her back to the present. She finally spoke, her voice breaking with the weight of unspoken anguish. "You don't know what I've been through. Elliot, you would be incapable of comprehending the situation." He responded with a gentle yet penetrating tone. "Maybe not. However, I am aware of this. The sensation of being neglected, dismissed, and abandoned. It persists. It continues to expand until it consumes you entirely." His words struck her like a surge, threatening to knock her off her feet. She observed her own reflection in his eyes, which bore the burden of his mother's absence and his father's negligence. However, she perceived a more profound yearning for comprehension and connection, which she was uncertain about her ability or entitlement to provide. "Elliot, you must comprehend that we all bear our own burdens," she stated. However, her words were hollow and unable to establish the necessary distance which she required so urgently. "And you?" Elliot inquired, his gaze fixed on her and his voice unyielding. "Laura, are you currently alive, or are you merely eking out an existence as I am?" Her breath was taken away by the inquiry. She was unable to respond, as she was aware that he was correct in her heart. She was not alive. She was merely existing, clinging to the shards of a life she had allowed to elude her for an extended period. Now Elliot, with his steady, quiet voice and penetrating blue eyes, was compelling her to confront all that she had suppressed. He was seated across from her. Outside, the rain intensified, its rhythmic pounding against the windows resembling a pulse. Laura experienced the sensation of being on the brink of a tempest, a storm that was on the brink of engulfing her entirely. However, there was a part of her that was uncertain about whether she wanted to continue fighting it. The frigid and unyielding rain persisted in its relentless rhythm. Laura elected to disregard the indistinct warning of distant thunder. The soft glow from the table lamp cast weary shadows across her face as she stood in the faintly lit living room. This evening, the lakeside villa was more oppressive than it had ever been, as if the walls were itself closing in. Her thorax contracted with an unexplainable weight, a suffocating pressure that no amount of air seemed to alleviate. Elliot entered the room, bringing the cold of the tempest with him. He expressed no indications of distress, despite the fact that his damp t-shirt clung to his frame and his jeans were soaked. He placed his umbrella on the ground and fixed his acute gaze on Laura, as if he were in quest of an object that was concealed within her, an object that she was not even aware existed. Walking in this weather is not advisable. Laura's voice was subdued and strained, as if the tension in the room had fractured it, as she broke the silence. Additionally, what about you? Elliot responded with a subdued tone that was tinged with challenge. Why do you consistently remain seated in this position, as if you are anticipating an event, yet you never express your thoughts or take any action? Laura's body remained frozen. He stared with such intensity that it appeared to have penetrated her meticulously constructed defenses, revealing all that she had endeavored to conceal. She stated, "I am unaware of the subject matter you are discussing," while endeavoring to maintain consistent tone. Elliot countered, his presence overwhelming as he drew closer. "You know exactly what I mean." His voice, which was simultaneously tranquil and turbulent, enveloped her in a manner reminiscent of the gusts that blew outside. "You are more knowledgeable about it than any other individual. However, you are extremely apprehensive, reluctant to acknowledge it." Elliot ceased. Laura's voice cracked under the strain as it rose to a volume that exceeded her expectations. However, Elliot remained stationary, his gaze unwavering and his stance unyielding. "You are unaware of the content of your speech. Additionally, what about you? Are you aware of the actions you are taking?" Elliot's words were sharp and tinged with an ache that Laura could not ignore as he inclined his head slightly. "I have observed it since my arrival. You are dissatisfied. You act as if you refrain from doing so. However, I am unable to conceal my awareness of it." Laura, who could sense the conversation spiraling out of her control, turned aside in an effort to terminate it. She advanced toward the hallway, but Elliot pursued her. His hand extended and firmly grasped her wrist, preventing her from continuing. "Laura," he said gently, her name falling from his lips without hesitation for the first time, devoid of any formality. His tone was now more intimate, resembling a confession. "You are not the sole individual who experiences feelings of abandonment. I concur. I am unable to continue to maintain the illusion that you are unimportant to me." The words struck Laura like a tidal surge. She turned to face him, her eyes alighting on his. His deep blue eyes were glistening with anguish, longing, and a truth she was not prepared to confront, something she was unable to identify. She desired to speak, to refute him, to deny everything. However, the words were stuck in her larynx. She murmured, her voice trembling. "You are unable to comprehend. We are unable to. We are prohibited from doing so. However, you are also experiencing it, are you not?" Elliot inquired, his gaze remaining unwavering. "It is unnecessary for you to express it. I am already aware." The room was briefly illuminated by a flash of lightning that tore through the sky. It illuminated the tiny, fragile space between them and Elliot's face, which was etched with pain and defiance. Laura could sense the gravitational pull of him, the unspoken gravity that had been accumulating for an extended period. She desired to withdraw, finally closing the door on whatever this was. However, her body betrayed her as her feet remained firmly planted and her resolve dissipated like the rain cascading down the window. Her lips quivered, but Elliot leaned in before she could think or reason. He delivered a delicate, hesitant kiss, as if he were allowing her to recoil. However, she refrained from doing so. She was overcome by the calm desperation and warmth of him, and for a fleeting, perilous moment, she allowed herself to forget. She allowed herself to be enveloped by his touch, thereby disregarding responsibility, remorse, and reality. The room was enveloped in silence as they separated. Laura felt her chest tighten and her respiration quicken as Elliot's gaze lingered on her, filled with emotion. "What have we accomplished?" As she avoided his gaze, she murmured, her voice scarcely audible. Elliot responded with a firm, unwavering tone, "Something we cannot deny. Laura, you are free to continue running. However, you are unable to continue to dispute this." She was oppressed by his words, which were both undeniable and oppressive. Laura turned and strode away without saying a word, her steps hurried and unsteady. She continued until she reached the sanctuary of her bedroom, where the door closed behind her with a finality that did little to alleviate her pounding heart. She leaned against the door, gasping for oxygen, as if she had just survived a storm from which she was uncertain if she had intended to flee. The rain became more intense, relentlessly beating against the windows. But a far greater tempest was raging within Laura, threatening to unravel everything she had once held steadfast. She was uncertain as to whether she possessed the fortitude or the willpower to reconstruct the walls she had constructed around herself. As they were collapsing, the rain ceased to murmur. Laura's anxiety was exacerbated by the unremitting tempest that rumbled against the villa's roof. In the dimly lit living room, she sat curled on an ancient armchair, her hands clenching the hem of her dress as if releasing them would send her into a tidal wave of emotions. She was plagued by the memories of her encounter with Elliot, which were both sharp and unyielding, like a wound that refused to heal. Firm and deliberate footsteps emanated from the hallway. Laura's pulse plummeted as she observed Claire, the sole friend she had ever truly trusted, standing in the doorway. She glanced up. Claire's piercing eyes, as keen as a blade, swept over Laura before settling on the staircase that led to Elliot's room. Claire entered the room without speaking, placed her luggage on the table, and poured herself a cup of tea. Her actions were deliberate and calculated. "Laura." Claire finally spoke, her voice composed but tinged with an unspoken emotion. "You appear to have recently returned from a tempest. Is there anything you would like to convey to me?" Laura struggled to maintain her composure by biting her lip. "It is insignificant. The atmosphere. It has been a difficult time. Additionally, I have been experiencing some degree of malaise." Claire's smirk was a fleeting, hollow expression that was devoid of affection. "Is that the case? I am unable to shake the feeling that there is something more to it." Her eyes never strayed from Laura as she drank her tea. "It is as though you are concealing something." The weight of Claire's words caused Laura to freeze, causing her to be confined to her seat. Although they were not accusations, they were effectively directed at Laura's anxieties, which she had been endeavoring to suppress. Claire placed her cup on the ground, bent forward, and fixed Laura with an icy gaze before she could respond. Claire's words were as resonant as the rain outside, as she stated, "I observed Elliot exiting this location last night. Would you be willing to provide an explanation?" Laura's pulse abruptly ceased. She opened her mouth, but no sound emanated. She was aware that Claire was too intelligent to be deceived. Laura's meticulously crafted facade appeared to be unraveled by her friend's unwavering gaze. Claire was now anticipating her confession. "Laura, what are you contemplating?" Claire's voice was as sharp as a scalpel as she pressed. "Are you even cognizant of the actions you are taking? Elliot is the firstborn of Ethan. He is the offspring of your former spouse. Claire, that is sufficient." Laura attempted to express her objections. However, her voice was insufficiently persuasive, even to herself. "Is that sufficient?" Claire's chuckle was brief and bitter. "Laura, I have always believed that you were capable of overcoming this. However, I am unaware of your current activities." Claire's focus became unbearable for Laura. Claire, her face fierce with resolve, seized her wrist as she stood abruptly, intending to flee. "What direction do you anticipate this will take?" Claire demanded with a voice that was both subdued and weighted with intensity. "Do you believe that Elliot is merely a boy? He is not. He is a male. Additionally, you have violated a boundary that no one will overlook." The tense silence was abruptly interrupted by a loud commotion emanating from the staircase before Laura could respond. Elliot stood before the women, his visage pale and his eyes dark with anger and pain. The fact that he had heard everything was evident. "Elliot!" Laura's voice was scarcely audible as it trembled. "What do you believe I am?" As Elliot inquired, his voice was laden with disappointment. "Is there an error you wish to forget? Or is it a pastime that you are engaging in as a means of escaping your unhappy life?" Laura experienced the force of his words as a physical impact. She desired to provide an explanation, to inform him that his beliefs were incorrect. However, the expression on his face indicated that he would not be listening. Claire maintained her silence, her acute eyes observing everything but refraining from uttering any additional words. She appeared to have resolved to withdraw, leaving Laura and Elliot to confront the repercussions of the situation. The sound of the door closing behind Claire reverberated like a funeral bell, signaling the dissolution of all that Laura had endeavored to preserve. Elliot's gaze was fixed on Laura with an unwavering intensity as he slowly descended the staircase. "Do you desire for me to depart?" He spoke with a low voice that was tinged with animosity. "All right, I will depart. However, do not anticipate my return." "Elliot, please wait," Laura begged, but he had already arrived at the door. He stepped out into the torrential rain and vanished into the darkness without a glance back. Laura was paralyzed by the tumultuous state of her surroundings. The rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows as if to sweep away everything. However, Laura was aware that the events that had transpired could not be undone. She had violated a boundary, and she was now obligated to confront the repercussions, not only with Elliot but also with herself. The walls of the villa appeared to close in on her as the storm continued, leaving her with nothing but the haunting realization that some storms could not be weathered in the repercussions of her choices. The lakeside villa was enveloped in darkness, pierced only by the relentless pounding of the rain on the roof and the eerie whistle of the wind through the gaps in the doors. Laura sat in the living room, grasping a cold cup of coffee as if it were her final lifeline. She had remained seated in the chair since Elliot had abruptly exited. The haunting farewell she had never wanted to hear, the echo of his retreating footfall, continued to linger in her mind. She now felt as though she was surrounded by shards, fragments of her life, and emotions that she had never intended to descend into. The front door abruptly opened, allowing a gust of icy wind to enter, causing Laura to recoil. Elliot was not present when she abruptly turned. Claire was the individual in question. Claire entered with a brisk pace, her expression ice-cold, and her keen eyes bearing the weight of a decision that had already been made. Laura attempted to speak, but her larynx tightened, causing her to struggle with her words. Claire declared, "We must converse." Her voice steadied and authoritative. Laura observed Claire's approach without speaking. She was aware that there was nothing more to be explained. Claire sat down and deposited a folder on the table, her movements deliberate and unyielding. "Are you aware of the issue that causes me the most distress?" Claire initiated the conversation with a tone that was tinged with controlled fury. "It is not solely the events that transpired between you and Elliot, although that is certainly detrimental. It is that you allowed yourself to become entangled in an activity that you were aware would lead to the destruction of both of you." Laura hesitated before commencing the process of opening the folder. Inside were indistinct but recognizable photographs of her and Elliot, which had been taken from a distance. She believed that no one could have witnessed the moments. However, it was the final photograph that caused her to experience a chill. Standing outside the villa, Ethan, her ex-husband, gazes at them through the window. Claire stated, "He is aware of her voice, which is as cold as ice. Ethan has been monitoring your activities. He is merely anticipating the appropriate moment to act, which is why he has not yet done so." Laura perceived that the chamber was devoid of air. Her mind was in a state of agitation as her thorax contracted. Ethan, the man she had once cherished and attempted to establish a life with, was now a specter that hung over her every action. Claire continued, "You must depart, Laura," her demeanor softening but remaining unwavering. "Not for Elliot's sake, but for your own. You will not be granted an additional opportunity if Ethan elects to take action." Laura gazed at her friend, her eyes welling with tears. "However, what about Elliot?" she murmured, her voice breaking. "He is the sole remaining member of my family." Claire's expression was a blend of sympathy and firmness as she gingerly shook her head. "Laura, it is impossible for him to fulfill all of your expectations. In the same manner that you do, he must also discover his own healing process. You have transgressed boundaries that are irrevocable. However, you still have the opportunity to begin anew. A long way from this location. Laura sat in silence, the weight of Claire's words overwhelming her. She was aware that her friend was correct in her heart. She was compelled to depart. However, the idea of abandoning Elliot, of leaving behind the soul connection that had restored her sense of vitality, was intolerable. In a manner that she had never anticipated, her heart was sore. Laura organized her possessions the following morning. The letter she left on the table was succinct but profound. Elliot, I am uncertain as to whether you will ever be able to forgive me. However, I trust that you will lead an existence that I am unable to demolish. Please refrain from seeking me as I have elected to depart. I am obligated to do so, not because I desire to. Laura. Laura peered in the rearview mirror as her vehicle departed the villa. The surface of the lake was unusually still and it did not reveal any of the turmoil that was concealed beneath it. However, she was aware that the undercurrents were never truly at ease beneath that serene facade. Claire received a telephone call a few days later. Ethan's voice emanated a tranquil quality that was slightly tainted with unease. Is she no longer present? He stated. Laura did the correct thing. However, Elliot remains in the same location. Claire, do you believe I will simply relinquish this matter? Claire's breath caught in her throat, and she froze. She was acutely aware of the significance of Ethan's words. He was not inclined to issue idle warnings. However, before she could respond, he abruptly terminated the call, leaving only the eerie silence of the deadline. Consequently, the narrative concludes. It appears to be the case. However, the inquiries persist for those who observe, akin to a tempest that refuses to dissipate. What is the next course of action for Ethan? What will be Elliot's response upon discovering Laura's letter? Additionally, Laura, is this merely the prelude to a far more significant tragedy, or has she genuinely escaped the shadow of her decisions? Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.